We should be live here in about 3 seconds. 2, 1. Good. Well, good. Well, welcome to Real Fridays for those who are logging in for the first time or again for another time. Real Fridays is a show that we do on a weekly basis every Friday at 12:30 between myself, Rick Rock, a retail mortgage banking expert, and Brock Cassidy, who is Chief Revenue Officer over at NewZip and is a kind of a fintech real estate tech innovator, a guy that's really, I think, for what I love about Brock, you've done so much in your career, like at such like you're 31, 32 years old. I know you hate when I talk about your age, but I
11
love
years in the industry isn't that little anymore. It's not like
well,
it's been a talking point for 11 years now, but sure.
well, that's what I'm saying though, dude. Like I part of it is because I'm so impressed with your background and what you've done and what you've been able to accomplish both at Rocket and now at NewZip. In fact, Laura and I, and then well, let me get the introductions. But I was talking about you in a show that I was doing with Laura. I didn't name you specifically, but I was talking about you with some comments. But Jeremy Paul, so Brock is a real estate tech, fintech, real thoughtful innovator, both in mortgage and in technology. Then you have Jeremy Potter, who's I think probably the best lawyer in the country, in my view, that you could work with around tech, innovation, partnerships, contracts, like revenue sharing structures. He's a really, really thoughtful guy, but he's got a really good understanding of technology and flow, like how to really streamline the mortgage operation in a way that maximizes efficiency, lowers costs, and
here he
here
is.
we go. In fact, I was just talking about Jeremy Potter. This is good. Dude, I was just talking about you, Jeremy. This is like a perfect thing. Can you hear us?
Oh, yeah, we're good to go. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Did you hear my intro? And Jeremy Potter is the #1 lawyer in the country. Did you hear that?
The #1 lawyer in the country.
I said #1 lawyer in the country.
Everybody really appreciates it when you say.
I haven't had a chance to agree or disagree, so let's just leave it there.
We're in Donald Trump's world right now, so it's the #1 lawyer, the best lawyer, the most fantastic lawyer you've ever seen is Jeremy Potter. I actually do mean that for specifically. Like, obviously, if I'm going to take the CFPB or some regulatory agency to court, you'd not be the guy to represent them necessarily. But I think what I love about your thoughtful innovation is around contracts, revenue sharing, compliance, and just you have a unique intersection between technology, design, flow, efficiency, and sort of the legal landscape around all that, how all that sort of comes together. And there's so few lawyers that I've worked with that actually has that kind of skill set. So I mean it. I think you are the #1 lawyer in the country, in my view, in Rick Rock's world. In Rick Rock's country, you're #1.
I'm learning how to take a compliment, so I'll take the compliment. I'll say thank you. And Laura, I think one of the things that Rick just described that makes life tough in innovation and product development and lending is it's hard to be holistic. It's hard to have a role that looks across the entire housing ecosystem or lending ecosystem. A lot of our industry, a lot of people, professionals in our space, like very highly specialized, worked in capital markets for 30 years, worked in, sales or production for 30 years. And so I think when we meet people and when we have people on that want to talk big picture or holistic, it's great because that's what we need to hear. But it's also hard because a lot of companies, the way corporate structures work, there just isn't a lot of space for a generalized holistic thinker. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Very true. Very true.
What has your experience been like trying to, crack some of those silos? As you think about
and it's interesting because I come from a unique perspective because I built a company from being employee #1. Yeah. So with that, you didn't have a choice. You had to know how to be what is that expression with chief cook and bottle washer or something like that, right? You had to be able to wear many different hats. So you didn't have the luxury of just going to that expert and saying, here, you had to figure it out. You had to get those answers. You had to put the pieces together. And to your point, and that was so spot on, it's rare. very rare in our industry because it's been so segmented. And that's one of the things that we've seen in the last couple of years, where people that lost their jobs because of the downturn in the market, they had difficulty finding other employment because they were so specialized. So that's a really, really great and astute observation.
Right on. All right, who's next? What's the next question? Laura, tell us more. Tell us.
Rick's doing these really lengthy intros, and he hasn't introed Laura.
You know,
Tell us more.
I was on Laura's show. I was on Laura's show earlier today. That she's going to be publishing it here in just over a couple of weeks. I think you said, Laura, the 17th of
16th.
Or the 16th of April.
Yep.
And so she's a widely recognized thought leader. She's very well accomplished in the business. She was with AFR for forever. And she's just a very visible figure and voice in mortgage lending with a lot of executives. She's very well regarded in leadership circles. And I wanted her on the show because, in part, I think that part of the value of this show is to try to shine light on figures in the business. But what's unique about this show in particular is that there is kind of this 30s, 40s, and 50s sort of gamut. Like Brock is in his early 30s, Jeremy's in early 40s, I'm 51, and it creates this sort of fulcrum of experience between. Clearly, I represent, and Laura, you and I probably represent more where the industry's come from and where it is today. And we're sort of, as we, over the next 10 years, sort of wind down our careers to some degree, we're handing it off to people like Brock and Jeremy. And quite frankly, and Jeremy and Brock in their own right are exceptional leaders. And so the comment that I made on her show earlier today was, when you build companies, part of the hallmark of leadership is being able to identify good leadership and saying, like, look, this person's going to run with the baton, and you can't. What was the analogy that I used? It's like you can't necessarily fight the match, but you can be sort of the coach around the ring to kind of say, like, look, my time was, but now my time is around developing, cultivating, and moving today in the next generation of leadership. Especially people with haircuts like yours, Jeremy. That's amazing. Give us a side profile again, Jeremy.
Stop it!
Give us a side, dude. That's like a modern day mohawk.
It is.
Have you ever had a mohawk before? Seriously, let me see.
You guys got to spend more time in Detroit if you're surprised by that. There's some wild barbers. Yeah.
I'm always trying to represent Detroit, and we're on the cutting edge.
I'm surprised you don't have like DT in the side of your head. Chisel it.
Especially for opening day.
Big day.
Big day. So Laura, from your perspective in leadership, AFR is a widely known brand, in the business, and how are you taking what you learned at AFR and applying it to, your conversations you're having in the industry with your podcast, as well as your mentoring of other leaders in the business? You're on mute, Laura.
I don't even know how I got muted, but all right, I'm up. So it's interesting because when we decided it was time to sell and kind of hand the baby off to someone else, right? There's always that mode of, what do you do next, right? Do you go to another organization and take another leadership role? And one of the decisions that I made is to go more on the consulting side, similar to what you're doing, Rick, but very specialized, right? And now it's fascinating to me because having that table, let's take that executive table, you're realizing that table in most companies are not representative of every different perspective that needs to be there. So I'm finding, and Rick, kind of piggybacking off where you were going, and this is a great indication, right? When you're saying how you guys have come together with having these different voices and different perspectives, that's exactly one of the things that we're able to do. Because although when I started at that company, I was only in my early 30s, right? Which was very young to start an organization, right? So I was sitting at Brock's seat at that time, where you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I don't know what I don't know, but I have so much confidence, I can't fail. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to outwork everyone, and you can't tell me no. Well, then obviously as time goes by and you're experiencing things, you're like, oh boy, I made that mistake. Or, uh-oh, now I'm not as confident in that area. And that's actually the reason why it's so important to have these different perspectives, because at different cycles and depending on what your knowledge base is or your expertise, you're bringing different views to the table. So now I get the joy of working with many companies in the industry at an executive level where you might not necessarily know who I'm working with, but I get a seat at that table to be able to give them a knowledge base that they've never seen behind the curtain of certain things. Yeah. And that is so valuable because number one, I'm still learning. Because especially if you've done something for a very long time, you lose that outside perspective. You think you know it all and you think you have all the answers. And I'm here to share with everyone, none of us do. None of us.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about how you approach that? Because it seems like you're hitting on two really key things that affect the future of companies. One, can I surround myself with leaders who tell me the truth, who tell me the hard stuff? And it seems like a lot of CEOs, probably in all industries, struggle with that balance. So I'll start there. I do have a follow-up, but let's start there. Like, how do you coach CEOs and how have you been that voice for companies and what's your experience with that?
So I'm going to be blunt. I'm going to be like, okay, Rick said to me, I'm a Jersey girl, even though now I spend half my time in Scottsdale, but that's kind of how I come across. Yeah. I will only work with a CEO that wants to hear the truth. Okay. And the way that I approach anyone that I work with at an executive level, I tell them, this is the way that I work. I will be able to speak to anyone in your company. I will be present on every single executive meeting. I'm allowed to actually give my opinion and be able to give that. You don't have to listen to it. You can literally say, I don't want to go in that direction, but I am not going to hold back in terms of, no, you're going down the wrong path. This is the way you want to go. And then it's your choice. But I will tell you, to answer that question, I've learned that there are some people that do not want to hear the truth and are not willing to truly be open to listening and changing. So how do I do it? I pick who I work with. Sure. I honestly don't just work with anyone. I'm very selective in that process.
I really appreciate that because you're right. I think that's one of the key things. You can always put your head down and muscle through or work through. And a lot of people do, and it may cost them relationships, it may cost them money, but you don't have to. You don't have to be successful that way. And I think that the sort of 360 degrees is so important, but hard to hear sometimes. And so one of the things I've always wondered is there a benefit and a value? So that's inside the boardroom, inside the executive room. There's also this like culture of our industry celebrating our industry publicly, and you're only allowed to talk about stuff that's like positive on podcasts and in our industry. And so one of the thoughts around Real Fridays was originally like, let's just have the real talk. What's actually going on in the industry? And we've seen a lot of, I think culturally with social media and other things, that change is coming. People are more willing to talk. But do you think there's also a benefit broader than just the boardroom with the industry 100%. Getting a little bit more honest publicly? Like, how have you seen that change, or are you seeing it change, and how do you think about it?
So it's interesting to me. So let me take you back a few years. And I had mentioned this to Rick this morning when we were speaking. So before social media, before all of that happened, we got to work, right? We put our heads down and we muscled through, as you said, right? And we were focused inside our businesses. Maybe you went to some conferences, but it just wasn't the same connection, right? And then for me, 2018 was the pivotal moment in my particular career, because that was the first time that social media blew up in the mortgage industry. And that social media started correlating to conferences. That was the first time that was the first time I took a stage, but also the first time I got out there to conferences where people said, if we don't have this real discussion, if we don't actually open up and address the elephant in the room, we're all going to hit a wall. And I have to tell you, I was all of a sudden the energy level went through the roof, because I said, finally, we're coming together as one collective. Listen, we all love the mortgage industry for, yes, we can have success and we can all of that. But at the end of the day, we all know we're here for the ultimate reward of how we're helping families and communities. We know that people's lives are changing by the work that mortgage and real estate is doing. We know that, right? So if we all have the same mission and we all know why we're doing this ultimately, why would we not say, let's actually have an open and honest conversation? Maybe some of the things, and we all know recently there have been some big major changes that have happened. Well, how will that affect us, right? Now, from my perspective, just my personal thing, I never get overly concerned of the big, conspiracy theories of what that's happening. I think there's plenty of opportunity for everyone if, and Rick, you mentioned it to me earlier this morning, if we stay on track of connecting with AI, making sure that we're staying ahead, we're adapting. And these are some of the things that Rick mentioned, and they were so on point. And you know what? The last thing that Rick said when he was speaking about it, he said staying humble. And that, I honestly think, is the mic drop.
So Laura, I haven't spent a lot of time inside, different mortgage company boardrooms, right? I've been more on the vendor side, more on the startup side, more on the investor side, kind of adjacent to it mostly, and have participated in the industry a lot in the recent years. But what are the types of things, just to catch me up with, I think where Jeremy and Rick already are, what are the types of things right now in 2025 that that are being discussed or should be discussed that aren't being discussed that you're bringing up? Like what these real talks that you're bringing up that you need them to listen to, like what does that sound like right now?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with, we know that he or she who has the closest relationship and connection to the borrower, to the community, is ultimately going to win, right? So number one, anyone that thinks that, oh, that's not necessary or that's touchy-feely, and as long as you have the technology piece tied up, you're okay, that is incorrect. You need both of those factors, not just one of those factors. So that is definitely something that is a real conversation, that you cannot have one without the other, right? So a lot of it is, we know about, having the conversation about AI, that you can't even compare having, back when it was internet days, you can't compare how fast things are moving from that period of time compared to this period of time now. This is the time when we have to be aware of where we can pick up, not days, you have to pick up minutes. And I'll tell you, I have clients on every Friday, we actually have our executive meetings. We go down to the minutes of how long it takes us to get from point A to point B, what that communication looks like, how are we effectively changing the customization of the communication based on what the messaging has to be for that particular family. And that's the importance and the detail. We can't just get by. We can't just say it's good enough. We have to do better. All of us have to do better.
Yeah, Laura, that is inspiring, because I think one of the things I've played with a lot here for our industry, because of how localized and fragmented it has been, the example I've been using is, we all, and I like to use analogies, and the one I'm going to bring up here is diet and exercise. We all know that it has two components, diet and exercise. All the doctors say the same thing, right? If you look at those and you monitor those, you can make success happen. You can help people. But what we've also learned is that some people like to go running. Some people like to go rowing. Some people like to go to a gym. Some people like to get yelled at by a personal trainer. Some people like to take a walk after dinner. And similarly, you have to have, as a company, that same thought process and say, what are my people? What is my audience going to want? Who am I as a provider? And what are the things I can put out here to say, hey, you might prefer this, you might prefer this, you might prefer this. We don't have to do all of them, but we have to do enough of them that we have an identity and they know who they're working with. And so a lot of those same things are like, it's not that this is a mystery of what works. It's how do you take that principle and apply it to your systems and your people to deliver it to your customer.
And we have the data. We are in the year 2025. You have access to everything. We know if they have a dog. We know if they have a young family. We know, I mean, finding out, you know, if you, let's say it's a husband and wife buying a home, more than likely, there's going to be one main person that's going to be the person communicating generally, right? Whoever that is, there's usually one person that's like, speak to my husband, speak to my wife. There's that one person. A simple question to know who is the person and how do they want to be communicated to? Is it text? Is it email? Is it both? Would they like to speak on the phone to go over certain things? Do they want to meet in person? Whatever that is it that complex for us to receive that data, actually process that data and implement it? It's really not right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You know, Jeremy, let me ask you a question on your front, because it seems like you and Laura probably are confronted with the same, with the same challenge. My focus is much more on the modus operandi and making maybe, you know, procedural changes or personnel changes to make change. Where you and Laura are, I think, are operating at a much higher level to kind of create more disruptive change, either by introducing new technologies or in sort of new workflows, right? Because I'm very much situated into the existing paths of how a mortgage gets constructed. Like, how do you, like, driving change has been probably the biggest obstacle in your career so far, Jeremy, right? So how do you, is it a matter of just consistently beating the drum until the combination of the right people and the right market circumstance align, where the right people listen and the right market circumstance makes itself known to where change all of a sudden becomes like the right thing to do in that moment in time? Or is there a different strategy? Because how else can you effectively make change when change isn't always all that welcomed?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer it in two ways. One, it is a drumbeat, a consistent drumbeat that makes me a magnet for the right type of client, the right type of customer, the way Laura's talking about. Like, she's saying, I only work with people who are going to be honest about who they are and honest about what they want. Similarly, I try to, you know, be consistent so that people know to come to me for that particular thing. Once you get inside, what I like to say for change management is the most powerful thing a CEO could do is tell the room, this is what matters to me. Come back a week later and say, how's that thing that matters to me going? If you do that, you will see change happen in your organization, because that's how organizations work. People want to be successful. They want to deliver on their goals and their metrics. So it can get a lot more complex than that. You know, look at the data, measure what matters. We can get into the details, but I like to boil it down to, if you have a champion at the top who wants that change to happen, they can make that change happen. If you are trying to make that change happen at the grassroots or inside a business unit within a larger organization, you have a harder time. It's not possible. You can absolutely do it, but you have a much harder time. So it really does matter where you're coming in and who your champion is. If your champion's at the top, all they have to say is, here's what matters to me, and how's that thing going that I asked about. And if they keep asking about it, the organization will transform in front of them to deliver the thing they want.
Jeremy, you've kind of sat at both the executive on the inside that the consultant may work with and been the consultant. I feel like, So I'm curious which one, I guess, first of all, which one was more fun for you, but then kind of the differences there. Cause as I was hearing you say that, I'm like, I kind of remember, when we first started working together, you were kind of the guy on the inside that people were coming to.
Yeah. Laura, I'll be interested in your experience as well. So for me, going into a couple of different businesses each week, talking to CEO level, founder level, entrepreneur level people across the industry each week has been thrilling. The 2 years I've spent doing that means I get to hear from really high level people every day, and I get to see a variety of different business models and a variety of different offerings each week. That to me is like really feeds the curiosity and really feeds my passion. However, it doesn't result in the same fulfillment as rolling up your sleeves and building with a team, rolling up your sleeves and being a part of something transformational with a group of people who all have the same vision. And so I think you just have to balance it. I don't know how long I'll last, in the consulting role as a result, but I'm just saying that's the key difference. Nothing beats being a member of a team and building something that never existed before and delivering it and the going through that really hard work with a group of people. So that's my take. Laura, what's your take?
Well, you and I are perfectly aligned on that. And it's interesting because that was kind of the solve I had to figure out when I went on the consulting side, because I was missing that fulfillment because I was used to rolling up the sleeves and working with the team, and building something. So again, I figured out how my model has to work. That again, I select the CEOs that are aligned to have that, be ready for that change, that are willing to drive it down the organization, partnered, and I work directly in their business. So I am in their emails, I am on their teams, I am in their ring centrals, I am in their Slacks, and literally I am working hand in hand with their leaders. So I still get the fulfillment of feeling I'm building something from the inside, but yet get to do it from the consultant side. And going back to what you said about the change management side. So whenever I start with a company, I'll say to the CEO, give me the people that you feel are going to drive the biggest change within the organization. So usually it's your C-level or certain other leaders without. And I start doing one-on-ones with each one of those people to really bond with them. And then I make them my ambassadors. They're my change agents. So I work directly with that team. So the CEO is driving down what the result and the importance is. And then I work directly with that team of ambassadors that will push it down into the rest of the team.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, I think that it's all about change management. We've said that and we know it. And so how effective you can be, I like thinking of like, what's the smallest change or spot to get in that makes the biggest difference? And those champions, it's like a huge accelerator.
Exactly.
Brock's technology and NewZip is an interesting one, Laura, because it bridges the gap between realtors, consumers, and the lender itself. So that way, when referrals occur, it's more difficult for the consumer to be untethered from a lender, right? Because realtors tend to work with whoever they want to work with, right? So they try to create a more stickier relationship between the lender and the consumer, which kind of creates its own behavioral change, right, Brock? So it's like, how do you disrupt that? How do you try to go against the grain? Because part of that is you're trying to convince people against the way things always been done. It's almost like the title relationship, right? The realtor always, chooses the title company, and in part of it from a lending standpoint is to try to dictate that process to where it's more efficient and the flow occurs and it's not quite as disconnected. So how do you do that, Brock? How do you do what Jeremy and Laura with what they're saying as far as change management is concerned? Does that resonate? Do you have a different sort of secret sauce to how you get that done? Because you've gotten a tremendous amount of traction with lenders and banks and credit unions and non-depositories across the country. Like how are you introducing that new change?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a mix. I mean, we started pretty firmly with going to direct consumer lenders that were buying leads from places like LendingTree and OwnUp and Bankrate and Mortgage Research Center, so on and so forth. And so we, went to all those events, met all those lenders, found out, I knew some of this from when I worked at Rocket, but there's less than 10 lenders in the country that have a full national real estate network that's deeply integrated in any way. There's probably less than 5, depending on how you define national and deeply integrated. It's really expensive. Rocket now has spent billions of dollars working on it. In the past had spent hundreds of millions of dollars even building the base version. So the vision with NewZip was just to give people that have that specific issue, which is, the couple of hundred direct consumer lenders, that for free, basically. We have some software fees depending on what other bells and whistles people want, but the real estate relationships is like a zero cost model where the real estate model works over here, the lending model works over here, and NewZip sits in between as a referral network and really like a lead vetting and lead nurture arm that integrates with the partner. So the truth is we started with people that needed it. What has surprised me is that we have run into some of those other people that I didn't think needed it, and they liked this kernel of it or that kernel of it, and that's how product development has happened. And now we have, probably 20% of our volume, 50% of our partners are credit unions and regional banks. There's a few regional banks that do a little bit of direct to consumer. There's a few credit unions that do a little bit direct to consumer, but really that's by and large like your classic retail models. But what they love to do is give the absolute most cost savings and most cohesive experience to their members. And we help them do that. So we kind of happened upon, it's not just about the real estate problem, it's about the cohesion problem for those guys. And we're starting to run into it. NewRez is now one of our biggest partners. That partnership launched about a year ago. I think they're the number 3 servicer in the country, something like that. So they have this massive servicing book. And they had a similar use case to the credit unions that I just described, just putting the absolute best offers in front of their servicing book for purchase retention. They're good at refi retention. Purchase retention's harder. And so now we have sort of this purchase retention product. Now we have this credit union and regional bank product. And we still have our core of that's an absolute slam dunk with direct consumer lenders where we just triple or more their conversion on lead buy style leads. So we kind of just followed around the feedback that we got. But a lot of the traction we weren't expecting to get, and a lot of the traction I was skeptical of. I was like, maybe one person thinks this is a good idea in the credit union landscape, but I'm not sure. But we had some really great partners early on that helped us see why, introduced us to people, word of mouth. And so it's kind of become a channel for us. And servicing is starting to become a pretty serious channel for us as well.
What's interesting about what you're doing, Brock, is that there's an intersection between the consumer, the real estate experience, and the lender. And obviously there's a lot that's happened this week, specifically around the real estate, the technology, and the lender. And so I'm curious, Laura, and your perspective, and then Jeremy.
Hey,
Rick, Rocket, of course, to come from Rocket. What's that?
I actually have to go. I wanted to thank Laura for the time. It's amazing. I got so much out of this time, and I'm sorry to drop. This is going to be a great question too. So thank you, and I'll talk to you all soon.
Be well. Pleasure meeting you.
So
take care, Rick.
So Laura, do you think that the Mr. Cooper acquisition, how disruptive do you really see that to be? Or do you think that that's just yet another acquisition amongst a long line of acquisitions that tends to be noteworthy, but we sort of go back to business as usual? Or do you think this is something that actually is disruptive in a way where lenders have to think about things differently or do things differently?
But I think we should have always been thinking that way. Like, yes, it's a big deal because of the number, because of the size, because of that, right? But we should have always been thinking this way. We should have always been nurturing our borrowers. We should have always been tied to the relationship. We should have always been checking in with them. We should have always been tethered to that family. So maybe it's a wake-up call that some people needed to experience to say, this could potentially make it so I'm not going to be disconnected and that opportunity is going somewhere else. But shame on them that they didn't have that in place already.
Yeah, I think another thing is like change management at these lenders. I don't think it needs to be quite as stark as you were positioning it, Rick. Almost every partner we work with has mixed adoption of this team or this division really values what NewZip does, triples their conversion using us, makes a huge deal about it, pushes it to every client. And then we have, another third of the LOs that use us when it is an absolute perfect fit and the client's just begging for help with a relocation situation or something. And they're like, oh yeah, we have NewZip, we'll send you over there. And then there's a third that just don't use us because they want to build local agent relationships, and that's their business and their plan, and they're doing all kinds of things that NewZip, we work hard not to undercut that, but it's just a different strategy, right? So even as you look at our biggest partners like NewRez and Cardinal, like those guys have significant local distributed retail presences that are not using NewZip other than maybe a couple times a month, whereas their DTC teams use us every day, many times. So it's kind of like, doesn't need to be like one lender strategy. It can be one tool in the tool belt type of thing.
That's actually a really good point.
Laura, where are we going with all this? There's so much change happening right now at the federal. Usually, like changes either at the federal level that we react to, or it's at the industry level that the feds are trying to manage. Right. The problem is, right now, both realities are occurring. Right. So, like, where are we heading with this? It almost seems like it's a perfect storm where I don't even necessarily know. I mean, I know the GSEs, there's a lot of conversation going to privatization. And I know when the privatization occurs, there's just going to be an explosion of new products and new investors and new sources of funding. I'm not sure how that'll price out. I don't know how you assign risk to that to generate the pricing. I don't know how that's sort of collateralized and how that actually sort of.
But I'm going to tell you, Rick, I'm going to tell you that in change is opportunity. We should never, ever, ever be afraid of the change that's coming, because if you look historically, right, if we historically look at our careers and even just the time that we've been in the mortgage industry, you can see that when the biggest shifts happen is when the shakeup happens in terms of where some of the people on the bottom went up to the middle, and all of a sudden the middle went up to the top, and the shift happens because in those fringes is where those opportunities lie. Now, I will tell you, now is the time that we need to be dialed in. We need to make sure we're paying attention. We need to make sure we're listening to what's going on at the MBA, as the MBA is giving updates. If there's, if they're doing town halls now, virtual town halls, like almost every couple of weeks or something, right? We need to listen in. We need to pay attention. We need to have these conversations, not necessarily making drastic decisions based on it, because it's changing quickly. And I don't know if we have all the answers in order to be making those decisions right now. But now is the time to be dialed in, plugged in, asking questions, paying attention, and being there in order for us to be making educated decisions.
I agree with that. It's hard to quantify that a level further to understand what decisions to make.
Correct.
Right.
You're right.
And that's we're there's a number of companies I'm talking to that are really thinking on the to be acquired side, companies that are doing under $1 billion a year. And even though that rates are going down and production volume we're all excited about this, right? That rates are going to go down and production volume for those who can afford it is going to go up. What I'm seeing is that companies probably for the first time are saying, I'm out of gas. I'm going to use this opportunity to really sharpen up my valuation. I have a much better story to tell when I'm talking to a buyer now that we're not in a depressed environment. We're in an environment that's got a lot of wind at its back. And as a result, I am going to do the deal because rates are dropping. Usually it was rates are dropping, volume's going to go up. I'm not going to do the deal. Now I'm hearing the conversation slightly different. It just seems like there's a real turning of the tide in the business. And the business today over the next 5 years is not going to look a lot like what it's been like over the last 5 to 10 years, No,
and I agree with you. There's a lot of people that are burnt out. There are definitely people at that point that's just like, enough. You know, I'm done, you know? So I get that. And I can understand exactly what you just said. That makes complete sense to me, that this is a great time for me to button things up and look better in order to be able to make a transition.
Rick, do you, or I guess both of you, Rick and Laura, you guys both have insight here. Do you think that's seasonal at all, where like when things actually start picking up, hopefully that will, I mean, it started a little bit the last couple of weeks. Do you think that tune will change again? I mean, anyone that's been an owner or on a P&L has probably been losing money in at least Q4 and most of Q1, right? I would think. And but what if that quickly changes? Then does the conversation go away again, or do you think it has staying power, Rick, that you just try to have a good quarter and sell for a lot of these folks because they really are out of gas long term?
Yeah, I just think a lot of the owners, it's a combination of they've been through this a few cycles, so there's a fatigue. It's a combination of the age. A lot of them that I'm talking to have grandchildren, and they're not that old. They're late 50s, maybe early 60s. They probably could ride this out for another 10 years, but I think that if 2020 and 2021 hadn't happened, they probably would ride it out. But because there was such a successful period, the idea to fall from that climb with the idea of having to climb up again seems significantly more exhaustive. And I would say that the amount of money that a lot of owners made in 2020 and 2021, they don't want to lose it, and they're looking at a period. Even in growth, you got to invest in growth. Even in growth, you're spending money to be able to handle the new, the new production demands on your organization. You got to hire underwriters, closers. A lot of these small organizations, as we were talking earlier, Laura, at your show, a lot of these organizations haven't invested in AI or offshoring. So they're literally doing it the way we did it in 2013 when it comes to adding, processors, underwriters, LOAs, and all the infrastructure. And that's a heavy, expensive lift, right? So they're kind of trying to figure out what's the better use of my capital, In a lot of cases, it's the better use to some degree is not to sink it into more cost to grow for the next ride. It's let's maybe partner with an organization that's going to take that risk, spend their money. I'll keep my money, take my money off the table, and then be able to grow. Laura, does that make sense, do you think, or do you think I'm being a little bit too self-serving?
No, I think you're hitting it spot on. I mean, and from someone that went through that decisioning, I understand exactly where you are, right? You kind of get to that point that, yes, 20 and 21, we were celebrating, right? And it's one of those things of, so what do we think? Even if you stick it out, can you ever get to that point again, right? So it might be smarter to take your chips off the table, or merge with someone, to your point, right? And take a little of that risk off of you. So I think you're spot on. And it really did fatigue a lot of people. The last couple of years have caused a lot of fatigue. So I think you nailed it.
What else do you think is next? Just as we wrap this up here, what do you think is next as far as, do you think there's more consolidation that's going to occur, Laura?
I do. I think you might be better. I think you might be better off answering that question, but I do.
Any of the consolidation technology or otherwise, or any of the mortgage companies?
No.
So you'd be so after someone's created the event of change, do they bring you in to help oversee and guide that to make sure that whatever change they put in place is successful?
I will tell you, most of my clients that I work with are companies that are at a point that they're like, it's time to grow. We've gone through, we've pulled back as far as we can. We're in a good spot. We're profitable. We've been profitable for the last couple of quarters. We're in a good spot, and it's time for us to go. We are not standing still anymore. It's time to go. So most people bring me in where maybe they want to start a new division, or maybe they just want to hit the gas, right? And they just want to go in a certain area. So most of my clients that I work with are like, it's go time. Let's do this, right? Let's overhaul the company. Let's set ourselves up for a growth strategy.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of companies in that, we keep hearing about the pulling back. There's plenty of people that are poisoning themselves because they see the opportunity. They see some of the things and the changes that are happening, and they see the positioning, because we all know once the rates drop or once some of these changes happen, we all know it's too late. That's not when you start doing it. You should have already been planning this. The last 6 months, the last 12 months was the time when you were setting it up. So you need to think about that. It's not once everything is lined up perfectly when you go.
That's really insightful. And I think that's perfectly well said. Laura, it's been awesome to have you on, man. I'm really happy to have met you, and I've watched you online and just watched your career over the years, and I've never really had the pleasure to connect with you. So I'm really happy to have had this opportunity. And
a pleasure.
And you're going to hear a lot from Brock. Brock's been an awesome guy. I think, Brock, when did you and I meet? Maybe 2 years ago? How did we meet?
Probably a little more than that. When I was running partnerships for EasyKnock, we were working on a few different lender partnerships, and your name came up. I'm sure Jeremy introduced us. I would imagine. Yeah.
No, man, you're going to hear a ton about Brock in the industry, Laura. He's been all over the place and doing some really, really cool stuff. So he's been on the kind of the face.
Yeah, I don't think we'd really met much either. So good to chat with you.
This was great, and thank you so much. It's been such a special time together, and thank you for inviting me.
Laura, you're awesome. Thank you so much. We'll see you in New Jersey. And Brock, you got to be a sponsor and come to the New Jersey Association of Mortgage Bankers Conference that Laura.
Yes.
I think you're a chairwoman of.
I'm the VP. I'm on the board of directors and the chair of the women's committee. Yes.
Yeah. So NewsZip, do we have a commitment from NewsZip?
I've been to some of the New Jersey events in the past, but not recently.
Yeah.
Come on, NewsZip.
What?
Can you make it happen, Brock?
When are the dates?
June 3rd.
Probably. I'm pretty tied up the next few weeks, but clears back up around then.
Laura's going to speak out, and Brock, if you're able to attend, I'll make sure you get some airtime on stage as well with what we're talking about as far as some of the M&A and some of the the innovations happening.
Let's do it.
NewsZip would be great. If you guys would be a great sponsor for the organization, for the conference. But I think having young, really thoughtful, experienced leaders like visible at a conference like this is way more impactful, I think, than a lot of the faces that you typically see at these conferences. So we'd love to have you there, man.
Appreciate it. Yeah, doing a bunch of speaking coming up between our CEO Audie and myself.
You're speaking at the Lending Tree Tech Conference, right? Did I see that?
Yeah, LeadsCon. LeadsCon. So it's all the lending trees of the world will be there. Speaking on lead nurture and kind of telephony strategy with TransUnion of all things, which is something I didn't know a lot about until the last couple of years. That'll be cool. And then Rick, we're speaking together at the main mortgage conference, and then I'm speaking at a credit union conference in the DC area next week as well. So busy, or in 2 weeks as well. So
I love
3 gigs in the next 2 weeks. So
'tis the season. Conferences. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's coming back into conference season. It seems like I know there's like a couple conference seasons a year now, but
yeah, spring and fall. Those are the really busy times. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us, Laura. You're phenomenal, and I love your leadership. I think you're smart and such a good visible leader for this business. So I'm so happy that and I hope that we can collaborate more on some projects here coming up.
It would be a pleasure and an honor. Right back at you, Rick. Brock, a pleasure to meet you, and I will be watching, and I certainly hope you can make it to New Jersey.
Great. Yeah, awesome. Appreciate it. Good connection.
All right, guys.
Talk to you both later.
Take care, Laura.
Bye.